Hey y'all, so one of the things I wanted to touch on just a little bit in terms of things to think about when you're animating is doing animations for things that are going to be in the background. So I'm doing the mall footage because that has a lot of those. We have kind of this fountain that is here in the background, as well as different characters moving a little bit in the background and some walk cycles that are kind of up here. So there's a few different things to consider when animating things in the background, which is they're not going to be the main focus. So that really means that you don't have to get necessarily as detailed as you would, with the main character. And also, another thing to keep in mind is just generally what, you're doing to either draw attention to those things or not. So for example, we have this animation of the water, and what that's done with is it's drawn with these blue vector lines that are very thin. As you can see, they're filled with like the same blue that's in the fountain. It's just a cyclical animation that's very, kind of like calm and drippy. It's not super too much or drawing of too much attention. And one of the things that does that is you can see the walls and certain parts of the stores are outlined with black, and your character, your avatar, is always going to be outlined with black. And the thing about the vector lines is really, like, no matter how far you're like zoomed out, like any of the vector lines or black vector lines you use are going to be super visible. So if you incorporate, a line using the vector brush like this one, it's good to account for what size the line is, and also if it's very far in the background, not meant to catch a lot of attention, like this fountain, it's good to have it maybe be like here, it's the blue that's more close to the watercolor, so have it more kind of color match what you have going on could also be a good tactic. And then as you can see, these stores in the background are outlines, that was something that enabled me to fill them, but then other things aren't outlined at all. These mannequins don't really have outlines or any of the vector lines incorporated. I drew them all with this kind of more brush tool, the one that draws the vector, more so the shapes, as opposed to the vector lines. So the reason I did that, because the further you black kind of outline something or put a black outline around something, that's going to draw attention. And so, as you can see in these characters right here, if I could get a hold of my time on that would be great. They have really subtle kind of, movements, motions, they're just kind of chatting, not super duper bold colors or anything. And then for these characters walking up here, because they have a walk cycle, but because it's not like the walk cycle of the main character that we talked about, it's really not even, the bare minimum 8 frames. It's just enough to show kind of the legs are moving and the character's getting from, point A to B. And because it is a background animation, you really don't need to focus as much, and kind of hemorrhage over it having like the proper amount of frames as much as you're showing, kind of what's getting off. And but you also didn't want to do everything necessarily too willy-nilly, like I thought, in terms of the characters I was drawing and such, what people do at the mall, what people, kind of wear, and I wanted to get a good mix of people that you might see at the mall. So we have people walking around, there's this dude with his little dog, there's this girl who's a bit more goth, which at mall you may see people, repping really, lots of different styles and sensibilities, which is a good thing to incorporate. But yes, a lot of these posters these characters walking in the background that have these very simple animations of just, you know, a few frames being cycled through, you know, these posters, the things in the stores. Like here we can have these clothes in the stores, and they don't really have, you know, much outlines around them. They do have, you know, some vague patterns, but mostly they're just blobs in, you know, kind of the shape of what folded clothes might look like. And, you know, the same for over here, because you don't need to be, I mean, I have the outside of the store, you know, looking a bit like, you know, more complicated, because that gives the general aesthetic for what is kind of inside the store. And if you go to a mall, a lot of the stores really have these kind of like edifices around them and things like, you know, what text is around them, what kind of, like, you know, where the doors wood, or are they this or that like kind of shows you what's going to be inside. So that's something to put thought into. But in terms of what is inside the store, you want to show a bit, maybe some mannequins, but not things that are going to be complicated. And really, I'm very sorry for my dog, but you don't really need to overcomplicate your backgrounds, which is why these animations, as you can see, you know, she steps forward, kind of goes back to this neutral pose, which is the same as this one, and then, like, you know, has this other kind of stepping motion, and back to neutral, which you can see in, like, the animation of this woman right here. And I've kept to that, you know, pretty similar for, you know, the other animations of the other people that kind of go through the mall. And I've also recycled a lot of these animations, which we can see, you know, a little bit if we open up our our file. So this is for the walking right. So if we open up our walk for going to the left, it will take a moment to load, so pardon me for that. You know, it says it's not responding, but it's going to respond in a moment. And of course, like, you know, when they walk into the store and when they walk out of the store, walking into and out of the stores aren't going to change. The store edifices stay the same. And then with these walk cycles, pretty much, you can kind of, like, you know, you don't really need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. Yes, and then see, we have our walk left, where the characters in the background are looking a little different, you know, but again, not reinventing the wheel here. As opposed to having, you know, that man walking with his dog, we have a mom walking with her child, so I was able to kind of take, you know, that same pose, or instead of, you know, that woman in the yellow dress, with the, more kind of textured and longer hair, we have this blonde woman in a pink dress. But, you know, you can see if we switch between those two files for a sec, we're going to drag that file over here. Oh, okay, or it doesn't want to do that. Okay, that's fine. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, but as you can see, like, the movements are basically very similar. I just recolored, edited a few details. Here the heels are a bit more wedgy, but like a wedge heel, but the dress is basically, like, you know, the same length. They're like the same proportions, because I based that off of, like, similar character models. Or, like, you know, going over here, we have, like, you know, this kind of, like, punky Brewster kind of woman with an alien shirt walking around, whereas, you know, in this animation, which is the walk, I believe, walking left, so yeah, they're walking away from the store. So in this animation, we have more of a punk kind of guy going in a different direction. He has a little mohawk, and we have this lady in a red striped top coming out with her little boots. And in the other animation, it's this girl, you can see kind of enter with her blue little striped dress. So I basically just repurposed a lot of, you know, kind of the animations of what I already did, but made it look different to suit, different people.